Last week, we kicked things off with a bang, exploring the unsettling atmosphere of the town of Derry and thinking that we were getting acquainted with our core characters. We're diving straight into the depths of It Welcome to Derry in episode 2, and let me tell you all, this episode wastes no time in confirming our darkest fears and introducing some seriously unsettling new elements. This second episode manages to ramp up the dread, the character development, and delivers one of the most stomach-turning scenes I've seen in the It universe in a very long time. So with all that said, grab your red balloons and maybe a comfort blanket, and let's unravel everything that happened in this episode. Full spoilers ahead. We open by reliving the horrifying final moments of episode 1, but this time it's all from Lily's perspective of the massacre. Now, right out the gate, they're letting us know that what we saw actually happened. This wasn't some dream or hallucination created by It. Teddy, Phil, and Susie are dead. Now, what I found to be interesting in seeing this same scene, but from Lily's point of view, besides a few more different shots of poor Teddy getting ripped in half and thrown into the projection window of the theater, it's something subtle that we might have all missed. Right from the start, when the baby creature comes out of the screen, it never goes for Lily. Go back and watch the scene. Lily just sits there frozen, but the mutant baby goes straight for the others first. Now, why is that? In my last breakdown, we talked about all the different Matern Easter eggs and if they'll play a role in this season. Well, it seems they absolutely will. That turtle on Lily's bracelet, it might have been the reason that she wasn't attacked. It's basically serving as Lily's protection from It, and it may have kept her alive not only in the grocery scene that we'll talk about later, but potentially in the initial attack in the theater too. Remember when Maddie gave Lily that turtle, she referred to it as being lucky. There's definitely a lot more emotional weight in her lucky turtle charm, making it more significant than just a passing Easter egg. We're definitely going to keep our eye on this little turtle moving forward. Now, before we dive deeper into the episode's plot, we have a brand new addition to the show that we have to talk about, and that's the opening title sequence, so let's break it all down. Our first shot is of Paul Bunyan, the giant lumberjack and folk hero in American and Canadian folklore. Now, Paul Bunyan, like I mentioned, was a lumberjack, and he traveled the country logging and solving problems and contributing to the idea of manifest destiny and westward expansion. Derry's massive Paul Bunyan statue is one of the town's most memorable landmarks, and it played a key role in the standout horror sequence in It Chapter 2 when it came to life to terrorize Richie. Now, the name Paul Bunyan was also mentioned multiple times in the premiere episode. We got a glimpse of him on the sign welcoming people into Derry in the opening scene, as well as in a newspaper article discussing the city pressing forward with the statue of the Mystery Man. Now, I do wonder if it will take the form of Paul Bunyan again, like we saw in It Chapter 2 at some point later this season. Next, we see some of the town's key locations, including the Capitol Theater, which has the Music Man on the marquee. Now, here on the side of the pharmacy, you'll notice the iconic Uncle Sam "We Want You" poster. This, of course, ties into the Air Force's presence in Derry, but also in the trailer they released after episode 1, there's a shot of it taking the form of Uncle Sam attacking soldiers in the sewers. We also see a little girl with the missing signs flying around her as she investigates a sewer drain, most likely being lured in by it, similar to what we saw with poor Georgie. We then have a group of kids playing in the water by the same bridge we remember Henry using his knife to carve up Ben's stomach in It Chapter 1. And we also see a little boy walking towards the sewer as it is reaching out with his octopus-like arms offering the kid a lollipop. Then we see a lobotomy being performed on a boy at the Juniper Hill Asylum. Now, we know Lily has been sent here and we see her going back later in the episode. This asylum is known in the various Stephen King stories for performing outlandish, unorthodox, and often dangerous practices against its patients. We see it looking through a window at a little boy from the inside of what I assume is the well house, also known as the haunted house on Nailboat Street. The sequence then cuts to a classroom where Pennywise is controlling a projector as we see the same house being in the middle of a nuclear explosion with some of the kids hiding under their desk in fear of their lives. Now, speaking of Pennywise, we see him on a building as it's shooting into a crowd in the middle of a shootout. Now, this is a clear reference to George Bradley, a gang leader and a minor character in the Stephen King's novel of It. Together with his brother Al, they were a group of bandits that robbed and murdered several store owners across Derry throughout the early 1900s, as well as banks in the Midwest. In 1929, George and the rest of his crew were brutally gunned down by several of Derry's citizens in an ambush shooting. George was eventually shot in the head and killed. Now, during the 90s film of It, Mike Hanlon was told of stories that many townspeople had seen a clown shooting the same gun that they had been using, and each seeing him somewhere else in town during the shooting. One person even recalled seeing him floating outside of a window. We end the sequence by seeing the Kitchener Ironworks event of 1908. This factory exploded and 102 people were killed. 88 of them were kids and 14 of them were adults. A tragic cornerstone of Derry's horrific history. Now, speaking to the song that plays during this incredible sequence, is called A Smile and a Ribbon by Patience and Prudence, two sisters who were a young vocal duo and active during the time of 1956 into 1963. If you listen to the lyrics of this song, it's actually quite creepy and unsettling. To me, it sounded like they were talking about little girls having to put on a smile and to pretending that everything's okay. It's almost like the song is encouraging little girls to be more ladylike and to do things that are ladylike, which is incredibly fitting for this show and its time period that it's focusing on, especially when you compare it to our characters in the show like Lily, Marge, and Ronnie. Again, the lyrics, for example, the bigger my toothly grin is, the smaller my troubles grow. The louder I say I'm happy, the more I believe it's so. That perfectly encapsulates the dark optimism and forced innocence that it thrives on. Now, I hope we don't see some article coming out in a few days revealing this masterful opening was generated by AI, because that would be so disappointing. I bring that up because there was some controversy around some of the promotional posters leading up to the show, and unfortunately some of the posters were AI generated. I truly hope that some awesome design artist put this together because I found this to be so creepy, so eerie, and really effective. Look, man, we live in a time where most shows don't have opening title sequences anymore, and if they do, they're like 5 seconds long. I want more opening credits in my shows, and again, this one is just a great example of how effective one can be. It had a great musical choice. The lyrics are so fitting. The imagery shown definitely sets the perfect tone for this show.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Outside of Ronnie's apartment, we find two cops who are under the orders by their chief to arrest Hank, who's being unrightfully targeted as being involved with what happened to the kids in last week's episode. We have an interesting but also tragic detail here, as one of the officers makes a joke about Hank eating the bodies because their bodies weren't inside the theater after the massacre. It's sad because their families weren't able to properly bury them, and they have no idea what happened to their bodies, and they have no closure. Now, speaking to that joke the officer made, this being an example of one of the biggest takeaways from this episode, and that's Derry being a main character within itself. There are countless unknown things that occur throughout Derry, and it plays a huge part in that. It manipulates the awareness and the attention of people in Derry, both to hide its activities and to isolate its victims. This enforced apathy and lack of awareness also masks the murders during its active phases. It uses its powers to maintain the fake facade of normalcy within Derry, despite the gruesome murders and mass disappearances that regularly occur there, thus securing its food supply. Again, this scene and many other scenes throughout this episode really puts an emphasis on the lack of awareness from the people of Derry. Now inside, we find Hank knows that he's being unfairly framed, but his priority is Ronnie. This is where we see the generational conflict regarding dealing with Derry. Hank doesn't want his daughter to go back to school yet, while her grandmother insists she must go back to get her education to eventually escape in Derry. The grandmother brings up a fascinating reference comparing Ronnie to Nora Charles from The Thin Man. For those that don't know, Nora Charles was sharp, she was smart, and she solved mysteries. I found this to be an interesting parallel, and the show wanted us to know that Ronnie is very capable, she's very intelligent, and she has what it needs to be above the things that go on in this town. But let's talk about Ronnie's actual name, which was revealed in this scene, and that is Veronica Grogan. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because Veronica was a minor character in the It novel, one of the many children who died at It's hands in the 1950s. Now, could sharing the same name from a minor character in the book be an Easter egg or a possible foreshadowing for the character in the show? Now we watch as Hank tells his daughter that everything's going to be okay, but later we see that it isn't okay, and we also see why Hank is so protective over his daughter. Now at the Hanlon's house, Leroy welcomes his wife Charlotte and his son Will to their new home. Now last week we discussed the Hanlon family tree, and that being Will is Mike Hanlon's father, but I found it interesting that Will's mom is named Charlotte in the show and not Shirley like it was in the books and the films. They may have decided to change the character's name for creative reasons, or Leroy gets remarried at some point because Charlotte and him get a divorce, or maybe Charlotte doesn't make it out of this show alive. Now, whether divorce or she dies unfortunately later at some point this season, right now in the moment, we see Leroy and Charlotte are excited to be together as a family and happy to be living outside the base for the first time in 8 years. But back to some of seeing Derry's ways of welcoming new people in town, we see one of the neighbors walking their dogs, and it doesn't seem like she's overly excited to see her new black neighbors. Now inside the home, we see that maybe Will and Leroy are still discovering what type of father and son relationship dynamic they're wanting to have. I say that because Leroy is most likely not around Will as much on the account of him being an air pilot who's fought in wars. We see when he gives Will his new telescope, Will is surprised because he didn't expect his dad to know that he always wanted one. Also, the joke that Leroy makes about spying on the neighbors and Will says that he doesn't think that's a good idea also shows that there's a bit of a disconnect between them. If I were to make a prediction, I bet they're going to eventually bond over discovering the tragic history of Derry and its connections to it. It's also important to point out that Will loves space and science, which will probably be handy in coming up with ways to fight against it, but it also shows that he's educated, and being educated is passed down from Leroy to Will, and how important knowing the history and how important Mike Hanlon was to defeating it decades later. Now later that night, we see Leroy looking over the file of his attackers, which plays a key element of this episode throughout. Now to give more proof to my observation about the father and son relationship, we see that Charlotte was actually the one to suggest to Leroy to getting Will that telescope because he would have normally gifted him a tie or a baseball mitt because that's what he wanted as a kid. Again, seeing the Harlans' relationship either grow or dissipate over the course of the season will be very interesting to see play out. It's now Monday morning, and we see there's been a curfew imposed after the theater incident, as we also see Marge continues to try to fit in to look cool in front of the patty cakes. We see Marge makes fun of Elaine's crush on a kid by the name of Scott Mills, who also goes by the name of Scott the Snot, as Marge impersonates him until she's told to stop because Patty doesn't want the attention taken away from her. We see the rumor of Hank having hit the kid's body have made his way into the school, as the kids all stare at Ronnie return to school as her grandmother wanted her to, and we see Patty Cakes and Marge watch as Lily and Ronnie are talking to each other. We learn here that it's been about a week or so since the theater incident, as confirmed by the principal's announcement over the intercom about a candlelight vigil for Teddy, Susie, and Phil. We see Marge tries to figure out if Lily has been ignoring her on purpose since the theater incident, to which she said that it's just been a rough time, but Marge has her own agenda going on here. She claims she wants to help Lily get back in the good graces of the patty cakes like things used to be before. But something tells me that Marge needs someone else to wear the outcast label so the judgmental spotlight isn't on her. Now we watch as Will arrives late to class and is greeted by an upset Mrs. Douglas. This is followed by one of the kids kicking his seat away as he tries to sit down, and Will gets embarrassed in front of the whole class, but he meets a new character by the name of Rich who kindly picks up his pencil and compliments it. Now back at the airbase, the mystery of who attacked Hanlon seems to be neatly tied up. We meet Colonel Fuller, who tells Hanlon it was Masters, the same airman who disrespected him back in episode 1. But Hanlon isn't buying it. As he leaves Fuller's office, he tells him that the pistol that was pointed at him was Soviet made. Keep that in your back pocket for now, because that's definitely a breadcrumb for later. Meanwhile, Charlotte Harlan is getting her first taste of Derry life. We see her taking a walk, soaking it all in. She even walks past a familiar alley where the Losers Club will eventually hang out. She also notices the growing tension in town with the locals protesting the construction of Paul Bunyan. Now her walk takes her to the Quality Meat Shop, the same one Mike Hanlon delivered to in It Chapter 1. Inside she meets Stan Kirsch, also known as Stanley the Cleaver. I wonder if Stanley is related or married to Mrs. Kirsch, who you all might remember in It Chapter 2, the terrifying old woman who told Beverly she's the daughter of the carnival worker who became Pennywise. Now here we get another example of its influence on how it seeps into the town's surface, making everyday people ignore unnecessary violence. As Charlotte witnesses a group of 3 boys gaining up on one boy. What's upsetting about this is nobody in the surrounding crowd steps in. But Charlotte isn't having it. She intervenes, and one of the bullies actually growls at her as everyone around them just stares at Charlotte like she's the weird one for caring. Now, later that night, back at the Harlan's household, we see Charlotte recounts her experience, making it clear that she's not one to tolerate bullying. Which, speaking of bullying, we see Will doesn't share anything about his first day at school. Now, despite Charlotte's attempts to having a family dinner, we see Will is quickly dismissed from the table. Now, there's a brief discussion about their last home in Louisiana, hinting that Charlotte has a history of standing her ground. Something happened where a brick was thrown through their car window, and we can infer that this unsettling event was likely one of the reasons they moved to Derry, aside from Harlan being sought out by Shaw. Alright y'all, it is now time to talk about the absolute standout moment for me in this episode, and possibly the entire series so far. Now we find Ronnie in her room with the picture of her mother nearby, struggling to sleep with her father and grandmother arguing. She pulls the covers over her head, seeking comfort, but that comfort quickly turns to terror. Her bed starts to have a heartbeat, and the sheets seem to stretch endlessly, quickly turning red. Suddenly, Ronnie finds herself back in her mother's womb. The design choice is one of the coolest yet grotesque, brilliant things I've seen in the entire It franchise. We watch as Ronnie literally bursts out of the womb covered in blood. She turns to see her mother exhausted, who then tells Ronnie she ripped her apart during her birth, killing her.
I wanted what's to hold my baby. And you killed me. Like you killed those kids. Like you're gonna kill your father.
Then her mother's face shifts, growing sinister. Ronnie tries to escape, but she's still attached by the umbilical cord, and her mother's stomach transformed into this mouth with all these sharp teeth, and we see its terrifying eyes visible inside. Ronnie bites through the cord, but the nightmare isn't over yet. Her mother's body reshapes into something truly monstrous, creepily walking towards her until Ronnie's screams brings Hank rushing into her room. Seriously, kudos, props to the production and design team for this entire sequence. The idea of her bed, usually a place of ultimate comfort and vulnerability, becoming this grotesque, inescapable trap is just genius and so disturbing. Also, shout out to the actress Amanda Christie who plays Ronnie. Her physicality in a scene, her raw terror, her ability to convey the dramatic weight of believing she's responsible for her mother's death and now fearing she's going to be responsible for her father's death, truly phenomenal stuff. Now within the scene also gives us a prophecy from It. It said that he gets caught referring to Hank and he's going to get fried. This of course alludes to Hank facing the electric chair. Now, there are stills out there, and it's also seen in the trailer where Hank is handcuffed and he's led to a bus that's headed to Shawshank State Prison. I really hope Ronnie and the kids figure out a way to clear Hank's name because 1, I would hate for him to get blamed for something that he had nothing to do with, and 2, the death penalty would truly be a diabolical way to end this character's life. Now, let's head to the local bar when we finally get some quality time with Dick Halloran. He's with the other airmen who are talking about being interviewed regarding Hanlon's attack. It's clear Halloran has special privileges as he wasn't interviewed about the Hanlon situation. This scene also introduces us to the town's chief who's under immense pressure. We see the councilmen and other locals pushing him to arrest Hank despite having no evidence. They're threatening his re-election if he doesn't comply. Now, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's critical to recognize Derry as its own character. The councilman's words to the chief perfectly encapsulates this.
You think I'm not doing everything I can to place him there that night? I've got no evidence, and he's got an alibi. This is America.
This ain't America. This is Derry.
It highlights how the town sees itself as separate, operating by its own warped rules where justice can be swayed by mob rules and prejudice. Now, true to form, the chief abuses his power. He has the bartender tell Halloran's table to leave. Now, this could very well be the spark that ignites Halloran's idea for the Black Spot, the black-owned nightclub for mostly black servicemen that we discussed in last week's breakdown. Now, for those that didn't watch or listen to my breakdown last week, the Black Spot was tragically burnt down later by white supremacists, but Halloran, with his abilities having the shine, saved several black club goers, including Mike Hanlon's father. Again, watch my last week's breakdown for more of Halloran's critical role in this story, as we're already seeing the beginnings of his journey and the challenges he's facing. Now we cut to the next morning to see the digging site where we find Colonel Fuller is overseeing this project. Now, in the woods, we see some locals looking from the outside, observing the area. Now, one of these characters was seen in the latest trailer and will be used by the Air Force at some point and seems to have some kind of special abilities to see into the past. Based on what I've seen from the trailers of this show, the local indigenous tribe will play a big role in It, Welcome to Derry. Remember in 2019's It Chapter 2, the knowledge of how to defeat It was found out by Mike, who was visiting the local indigenous tribe, the fictional Shikokawa people, who he learns were the first to encounter the interdimensional entity and conduct the ritual to trap Pennywise in a vessel. Now, after a long night of moonshine drinking, we see Halloran is hungover. Now, Colonel Fuller isn't a believer of Halloran's abilities and accuses him of privilege abuse and threatens to revoke his benefits, setting up a tense power dynamic between the two. Now, back at the school, we see Lily ignores Marge waving at her and decides to not sit next to Marge in the patty cakes. We see Ronnie sits next to Lily and shares what she experienced the night before. Now, the patty cakes see them talking and says to Marge that they thought that Lily wasn't crazy anymore, as we see that they've already came up with a name for Ronnie's dad as Hatchet Hank. Marge breaks up the tension by making a joke and making the others laugh, and again, we see Patty doesn't like the attention taken away from her as she mentions if Marge was wearing the same outfit from the day from before. I'm so curious to eventually see what it decides to use against Marge. Based on one of the first trailers, it looks like her fear of her eyes being big and her new glasses will be used against her, but I also wonder if her wanting to be liked so much by the patty cakes will be used against her as well. Now we watch as the scene intensifies as the patty cakes play patty cake and Lily and Ronnie argue. Ronnie is furious Lily didn't tell the cops about the monster. Now, logically speaking, Lily feared that being labeled crazy and sent back to the asylum. Both sides are understandable. Lily's protecting herself and Ronnie's grappling with the trauma of dealing with the fear of losing her father and feeling responsible like she did with the death of her mother. We see Ronnie curses out loud and the cafeteria goes silent and she's sent to detention. Speaking to this scene for a second, both of these actors are great here. The beauty of the scene, besides the incredible acting, is the writing in this moment. You can understand both sides. And with that said, I throw the question to you all in the comments below. Whose side were you on during the situation? Me personally, if Lily told the cops that she saw a monster, I doubt that anyone would believe her and she would just end up in the asylum regardless, and Hank would end up in jail in my mind anyways. Now here we get some much needed comic relief as Will and Rich's friendship continues to grow. Now Rich's crush on Marge is clear, even earning a finger from one of the other girls. Shout out to Richie's Mini Mioso poster in his locker. If you all don't know, this was a Afro-Latino baseball pioneer. Now we watch as a stink bomb is thrown into the hallway, which sends Will running to Mrs. Douglas, landing Will into detention as well. Now in detention, we see Ronnie and Will meeting for the first time, and they have a nice scene between the two as he talks about his love of science. Unfortunately, this conversation is cut short as Ronnie sees Lily getting taken away by the cops after their argument. I really like the scene between Ronnie and Will, and speaking of the kids, I know we're all still in shock and still upset about losing Phil and Teddy and Susie, RIP, but the new group that we have here with Lily and Ronnie and the new additions of Will and Rich, and of course Marge, who's a kiss ass, this is a solid group of kids and I'm interested to learning more about them and seeing their dynamic on screen. Meanwhile, we see Charlotte meets Rose, the owner of the secondhand store antique shop. This being the same shop Bill repurchased his old bike from Stephen King himself in It Chapter 2. I don't know if I read their interaction wrong, but was Rose acting a bit weird to you all? Now, I'm sure that Rose is going to end up being a good supporting character and be on the good side, but there was definitely an awkwardness between the two in the scene, and I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that her husband is working in the Air Force, and it seems like the locals don't want the Air Force in Derry. Now, at the police station, we finally find out the chief's name, and it's Clint Bowers, meaning that he's related to Henry Bowers, who was the main bully who picked on and tried to kill members of the Losers Club, including Mike. Now, remembering Clint was pressured by the councilman, we watch as he manipulates Lily. He implies townspeople will blame her for the theater incident due to her loony history, threatening putting her back into the asylum if she doesn't lie about Hank being involved in the theater situation. My heart truly broke for Lily in this scene because she's desperate to avoid going back to the asylum. As we see, Lily unfortunately takes the bait as Hank is later arrested for questioning. We watch as Ronnie rushes to Lily's house to confront her, yelling for Lily to tell the truth. Again, she's in fear of losing both of her parents. Next morning, back with Leroy, he pays a visit to Masters about the pistol. Leroy knows that Masters lied about being the attacker by upsetting him enough to pick up the pistol to shoot him, but he sees that he doesn't know how to operate the pistol, but the question is now, who is he covering for? Hanlon now back in Shaw's office, he tells him what he found and he will be further investigating the situation, but before leaving, we see Shaw wants to tell him the truth. This was all a test set up by Shaw to see if Hanlon was the man he believed him to be, and also because of his damaged amygdala. Now, for those who don't know, the amygdala is a small part of your brain, but it has a very big job to do. It's the major processing center for your emotions. Now, the injury is key for Shaw because this is an extremely rare injury, and for that, he needs him for a top secret mission that involves the restricted area on the base for someone who can't experience the emotion of fear. This explains why Hanlon barely blinked an eye when the gun was pointed in his face last week and when Masters was assembling the gun in the holding area. Now, as we come to an end of this episode, we see Lily at the local grocery store and we get this extremely crafted scare moment. As she walks around, the aisles start to close in on her and we hear whispers of voices calling her crazy and the people in the store being weird by smiling and following behind her. Over the intercom, her name is mentioned as the whispering calling her crazy gets louder. Lily finds herself trapped in an aisle that has cereal boxes with the face of Maddie, Susie, Phil, and Teddy. She runs into another aisle that's full of pickle jars, and one of them has her father's face in it. Remember the story that her father's remains were spread out in jars after his incident at the factory. She smashes the jar with his face in it, but the other jars with his body parts breaks around her and form into this octopus type of creature, begins crawling towards her and it wants a kiss. As she snaps back to the reality, the clerk sees the mess that she made and she looks absolutely insane. As we unfortunately later see Lily being taken back to the asylum. I have to mention this again because this was yet another incredibly crafted scare scene. Lily, dramatic moments worked, the build-up was great and seeing all the people looking at her, and I know some people criticized the CGI with the baby last week, but I thought the pickle face design was absolutely flawless. I figured we would see her fear about what happened to her father at some point this season, but finally seeing it here, and we might see others later down the road, but seeing it in this scene, it didn't disappoint. Our episode concludes with Shaw showing Hanlon the secret project. The government's plan to prevent nuclear destruction using a buried item in Derry. This ancient weapon generates debilitating, even lethal fear, and Hanlon being fearless is the ideal candidate. We watch as Fuller interrupts by announcing Halloran found something. Now at the digging site, a crane pulls up a car with dead bodies as Halloran confirms they're getting close to getting what they're looking for, leaving us with a massive cliffhanger. Now let's explain this last scene. What we know so far is this weapon kills those who are overwhelmed by fear, so it's safe to assume that those people in a car were killed because of the weapon. Now it's important to note what Halloran's powers truly are. Remember, it's called the Shine. Whenever you see someone in a Stephen King story with the supernatural abilities, they have the Shine. Now, I'm going to mention the new trailer again because in it, we see Dick touching an item and him being taken to a moment where he sees someone dying at the hands of Pennywise and he sees all the children floating as well. So Dick sensed those dead bodies and this item he's looking for must be nearby. Now, the question is, what is this item? What is this secret weapon? Now, it's definitely not it itself because one, it is already alive and active, and it is not an item that could be captured or contained in some traditional sense. And the Deadlights, its true form, can't be captured either because it's too cosmic. So here's my working theory. I'm thinking Rose, the antique owner, might know what it is. Considering she collects items and has that deep knowledge of the local history, it wouldn't surprise me if when it crash landed on Earth in the 16th century, maybe some piece of its form or fragment or a artifact or even its essence landed somewhere near the crash site. Many people or settlers might have come across it upon discovering its terrifying powers, managed to contain it or hide it away. Now, fast forward to our story, and the government is clearly looking for it. And again, this is where I believe the man we saw in the woods earlier in the episode and Rose will play a critical role, as they're trying to prevent the government from finding it, perhaps knowing the catastrophic consequences if this power falls in the wrong hands. Or even worse, it could be used against it in a way that could backfire horribly. The idea of humans trying to wield a weapon of cosmic horror is always a bad sign. Now, let's briefly talk about the characters in this episode, because I found this episode did an excellent job of letting each of their individual subplots breathe and develop. We have Leroy, whose investigation led us to discovering more about his injury and the revelation that he essentially lost his ability to feel fear. It sets him apart and makes him an unlikely yet powerful protagonist against a creature that feeds on terror. We have his son Will, who impressed me with his super smart observations and his sharp mind. He's clearly a strategist, and I have a feeling he's going to be critical in piecing together the mysteries of Derry. Charlotte was basically our guide in this episode, showing us the true horrors that exist in Derry. Her perspective gives us a more of a ground level view of the town's rot, which makes its supernatural evil even more potent. And can't forget the sheer emotional impact Ronnie and Lily's fears coming to life was just excellently displayed. It was a visceral, terrifying demonstration of how it operates, preying on the deepest anxieties of the victims. It's obviously a classic King move, and it was executed perfectly in this episode. We also met the new kid, Rich, and I'm definitely interested to see more about him and what he has to offer to the story as well. And of course, we got more of Marge, and we met Rose and our mystery guy in the woods, who I'm convinced are going to be pivotal roles in the story. Overall, I genuinely enjoyed the second episode. It had some spots that were a little bit slow in the pacing, but after the opening of the show and it being so explosive of a first episode, you have to follow up with something that grounds you, that reestablishes the narrative and really invests you in the characters, and this episode absolutely did that. I know we're only 2 episodes in, but I am locked into this show so far. The individual subplots, the unfolding mystery of the weapon, the deepening horror of Derry, it's all pulling me in. With that said, I think this is a great place for us to end this week's breakdown of episode 2 of season 1 of It, Welcome to Derry. So, what did you all think? Let me know your thoughts about this episode. What worked, what didn't work? What were some of your favorite moments? Some of the moments that didn't work for you all? Who were your MVPs this episode? Share your Easter eggs, deeper meanings, theories, predictions, all those things in the comments below. Thank you all for watching or listening to this week's breakdown. If you made it to this point in the breakdown, I want to thank you all for the support. Do me a favor and put in the comments right now, this week's special secret word is #pickles-are-scary. Now, if you all enjoyed yourself and enjoyed my breakdown, please do me a favor, hit the like button, but also hit the hype button for this breakdown. I would greatly appreciate it. I would also appreciate if you all can share this video and this breakdown to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show. But more importantly, please consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel for more It videos and so much more. Now, if you all are listening to this via podcast, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or wherever you all get your podcasts from, thank you all for listening. Please share this podcast. Leave your thoughts about the episode in the comments below. And also follow the podcast. Leave me a review and a rating. I would appreciate it. Alrighty, y'all. Until next time, remember you all are awesome. Stay safe out there and try not to let your fears get the best of you. And also avoid the pickle aisle next time you're at the local grocery store. I'll see you all again soon.